Hi, this is Randy, and in this part of the video, we want to kind of do a deep dive into the RRAS server itself and take a look at some of the configuration settings. So I've taken a subset of my notes here, and you can kind of see what we're going to do here. Initially, you build the server, all your normal server stuff, assign a static address to it, need static IPs, do all your post-installation tasks, all this involved Windows updates. I create local accounts, join it to the domain, device drivers, whatever you need, you build the server. Build the server, get it healthy, get it updated, and you're good to go. Then the next thing that I did was I chose to do kind of all of my preliminary stuff first, and so I went to install the Certify the Web client, and we'll look at that. And that needs dynamic DNS, and so I set that part of it up. Then I went to the firewall, and I went ahead and created my rules on the firewall, my inbound rules. I needed 443. Some articles I'd read said that you also need to support port 80 and 443 for either or both Duo or SSTP, and I started that way, but it wound up that all I needed was port 443. Then I went and actually did the RRAS install, add the role, which also adds a network policy server. And I've got two links here. They're excellent. They're not exactly what we're doing, but they're really good at what they are showing you. So this one is on how to install a VPN on server 2019. I believe actually it uses a server 2016 to demo this. And it's a good walkthrough with screenshots. He goes through the whole thing. But it doesn't include two-factor authentication. This one down here is a video on adding two-factor authentication, but it does it using Active Directory authentication. I'll show that to you when we get to the Duo part of it. And even from the Duo website, they take a different path than what I'm doing here. They take a shorter path. They use it goes from the network policy server to the Duo authentication proxy to Duo, but in that implementation, you don't have the same level of control for idle time, maximum connection time. You do have group membership control, but you don't have the other things, and so that's a shorter path. And then after you have VPN, and I recommend that you test each step of the way, be sure that you're good to go. Testing here checks a lot of things. And then I went lastly and added the Duo part of it, which would then take me over to the domain controller to finish the Duo part of it. Okay, let's just poke around and take a look at these things, and if we need to make this into two videos, we will. Okay, so here I've done my installation. I've configured the server, Windows updates, created my account, and I've installed the role of routing and remote access. So let me show you a couple things here. First thing is that when you install routing and remote access, you get ports for a lot of things, and you can turn those off. So you've got all these different options, and you can add or remove ports. Some of them wouldn't let me go below 1, but if I don't need them, I went ahead and took them down to 0 or took them down to as low as possible. So you can see here from my deployment, I'm really focusing on I'm going to allow 20 inbound SSTP connections. Okay, so that was done here. If I right click on the server and I go to its properties, let's walk through some of these screens. First thing is that I am supporting both IPv4 and IPv6. It defaults to an IPv4 only install, and so you need to come in here and enable it as an IPv6 router. So you check a couple boxes or do as necessary. Okay, that's this screen. Next screen is where you configure between Windows authentication and Radius authentication. Windows authentication will go right to the network policy server, and it will let the network policy server give the yes/no. That's not a bad thing. If you're doing just Windows authentication without Duo, that's the normal way you do this. If you're not doing two-factor authentication, and if you've got multiple servers, then you have them forward to a central NPS server. But that's the default, is Windows authentication. So here is where you make the Radius choice, and when you go to configure it, you specify a port number. And I want you to notice something here, is that I'm using the internal loopback address. And this was given to me as a best practice. I think from Duo, they had this as a best practice. So my Duo authentication proxy is on the same box. And so rather than using its actual IP address, I'm using the loopback address. Notice that I did change the port. This is not a default port. I added the 0. And one other very important thing is you got to give it more time. I believe it defaults to 5 seconds or so, not very much, maybe 10 seconds. But you're giving it a full minute, 60 seconds. That gives it time for Duo to be contacted, for their website to be contacted, for your phone, your mobile device to give you the notice, to give you time to unlock your mobile device and to say, yes, this is really me. So the recommendation is 60 seconds on that. Okay, that's pretty important to know. All right, now, are there variances to this? Could you use, if you put the authentication proxy somewhere else, then absolutely, you would use the IP address of where else you put it. Okay. Like a lot of articles, what we're doing here is we're overviewing, but you can take what we've got here and then maybe apply it a little bit differently in your situation. Moving down the tabs here, let me cancel that there. Okay. Moving down the tabs, IPv4, there has been a known issue with DHCP on RRAS. There has, and I played with it, and I decided it wasn't time to play with it. We needed to get this deployed. But I would prefer to use DHCP, but DHCP was not giving me the client address I needed. So initially, very easy to come in here and put an unused block of IP addresses. Very easy to do that and skip yourself the trouble of troubleshooting DHCP. But do know that it is a little bit problematic. Even when you add a relay agent, there's articles written on it. But our focus isn't that. Our focus is routing remote access. Moving down to IPv6, because we are using IPv6, you may need to check some of these boxes and give it the prefix delegation for this domain. Okay, so those are the settings that are done here. All right, now let's go take a look next at the network policy server. Okay, so here on the network policy server, when I chose radius, it automatically created this one. Okay, it did. It did two things actually. It automatically created this one, and it automatically created this radius server group here. Okay, notice the 127 address here. So it did that for you. Now, another, I guess, learning light bulb moment for me, I want to show that to you in that this is the two parts I was telling you about. We've got the connection request policy up here at the top, and then the network policies at the bottom. And the tool is two halves. In our case, we're only using the top half. We are not doing anything here on the network policy server on our VPN server, nothing at all. So these are the default rules. They're deny rules, and some articles will tell you to disable them. In my case, I found it did not matter. So what happens is that the VPN server accepts the incoming client request. We configured our routing and remote access to use to use radius. It then comes and uses this rule. Okay, so this is the rule it's using, and it does default to VPN. It creates this rule automatically. And the conditions, this is what I was telling you, you don't have a lot of control here. I won't show them all to you, but the daytime is about the most control you have here. You don't have idle time and that kind of stuff, but you can do daytime. Now, I also mentioned in an earlier video, you can do this on the firewall. Okay, so I don't see a problem with duplicating these restrictions. Here's the key thing, this last tab. This is the key thing right here. This is where the magic happens that allows the Duo authentication proxy to be contacted. Okay, so here's what happens. The routing remote access, the request comes into RRAS. RRAS is configured to use radius, which then sends it to this connection request policy. And on this last page, it tells it where to go from here. And it's telling it, forward it to the Microsoft routing remote access server authentication, and it finishes. Now that was automatically created, and that shows up right here. And what this is this is what makes this network policy connection request policy forward to the Duo, okay, the Duo authentication proxy. All right, does that make sense? These are the little pieces that if you understand these things, then you can say, well, I'd rather do it this way, or I'd like to change this, or I want it different. Okay, let me say that one more time, then I'll wrap up this video and we'll do a second half of looking at the other parts on this server. Okay, so let me walk through this again. We come down here to the RRAS box. Okay, we deployed it. We then said we don't want to use Windows authentication. We want to use radius authentication. When we do that, we had to define we had to define who the radius server was. When we filled this information in, when we did that, it then went to here and created this rule. It created this for us, and it created this group, and it pre-populated the group with the information that we filled in. So this information come from setting the radius settings in RRAS. This is where it came from. Okay, and then the rule, the way that how these fit together is the request comes here, we do whatever constraints are allowed, we then come down to authentication, it then forwards it to up here, the remote radius server group, which then now is going to forward it next to the Duo authentication proxy. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this video and we'll pick up from here, continuing on explaining what else is going on this box.